After my son bought his mother-in-law a 400K yacht and gave me a $2 gift card, I made a move that shattered his perfect life. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. $2.50 worth of credit to a coffee shop I'd never been to, tucked inside a card that probably cost more than the gift itself. I stared at it for a long moment, sitting in my kitchen on Father's Day morning, while across town my son was presenting his mother-in-law with the keys to a brand new yacht. Not a boat, a yacht. 43 feet of gleaming fiberglass and chrome, complete with a full galley and sleeping quarters for 8. How do I know this? Because Marcus posted it all over social media before I'd even opened my card. Videos of champagne toasts on the deck, his wife crying tears of joy, his mother-in-law embracing him like he'd just cured cancer. The caption read, "Nothing's too good for the woman who raised my perfect wife. Happy Father's Day to the most amazing grandmother our kids will ever know." Wait, let me back up. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. See, this isn't just about a gift card versus a yacht. This is about 27 years of sacrifice, love, and devotion being valued at exactly $2.50. This is about watching your own son treat a stranger like royalty while treating his father like an afterthought. And this is about the moment I realized that being a good father apparently means nothing when there's a shiny new family to impress. But here's what Marcus doesn't know yet. Here's what none of them know. That $2 gift card was about to become the most expensive present he'd ever given anyone. Because sometimes, when you push a man far enough, when you make it crystal clear exactly how little you think of everything he's sacrificed for you, something inside him just snaps. And when that something is a father who spent nearly 3 decades putting his son's needs before his own, well, the consequences can be more devastating than any yacht is worth. I'm going to tell you a story that starts with a gift card and ends with justice. A story about what happens when entitlement meets consequences, when disrespect collides with reality, and when a father finally stops being grateful for scraps from his own son's table. Because by the time I was finished, Marcus learned that some lessons cost a lot more than 43 feet of fiberglass and chrome. My name is Robert Chen, and for 62 years, I've been what most people would call a good man. I worked double shifts at the steel mill for 18 years to pay for Marcus's private school education. I took out a second mortgage on my house to cover his college tuition when scholarships fell short. I gave him my retirement savings to help with his wedding, and I co-signed the loan for his first house when his credit wasn't quite good enough on its own. When Marcus was 12 and broke his arm playing baseball, I spent 3 days sleeping in a hospital chair, because the insurance wouldn't cover a private room, and I couldn't bear the thought of him being scared and alone. When he was 16 and wrecked my truck after borrowing it for a date, I didn't say a word about the $1,500 in repairs. I just fixed it and kept paying the insurance premiums that had tripled because of his accident. When he graduated law school, I was the proudest father in the auditorium. When he landed his first job at a prestigious firm, I bragged about him to anyone who would listen. When he married Jessica 3 years ago, I walked him down the aisle because his mother had passed away when he was 15, and I'd been both parents to him ever since. But somewhere along the way, something changed. Maybe it was Jessica's influence, maybe it was success going to his head, or maybe it was just that Marcus had gotten so comfortable with my sacrifices that he stopped seeing them as sacrifices at all. They became expectations. My love became something he was entitled to, rather than something he was grateful for. The shift was subtle at first. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Visits turned into obligations rather than pleasures. When I'd suggest we grab dinner or catch a game, there was always something more important. A client meeting, a social event with Jessica's family, a weekend getaway that somehow never included an invitation for the man who'd raised him alone for half his life. But I told myself it was normal. This is what happens when children grow up and start families of their own. They have new priorities, new responsibilities. I convinced myself that being pushed to the periphery of my son's life was just part of being a parent. The reward for raising him well was watching him build his own world, even if that world didn't have much room for me in it. Then, Jessica's mother moved to town 6 months ago. Helen Whitmore, a woman who'd spent the first 2 years of Marcus and Jessica's marriage criticizing everything about their choices, suddenly became the center of their universe when her husband died and left her alone. Within weeks of her arrival, Marcus was calling her mom. Within a month, she had a key to their house and a standing invitation to every family gathering. I watched my son shower this woman with attention I hadn't received in years. Expensive dinners at restaurants he claimed were too pricey when I suggested we go. Weekend trips to wine country that were apparently adults only when I asked if I might join them. Theater subscriptions and spa days and shopping expeditions, all funded by the same man who'd forgotten my birthday for the past 2 years running. When I mentioned feeling left out, Marcus assured me it was temporary. Helen was grieving, he said. She needed extra support right now. It was just until she got back on her feet and found her own social circle. But temporary stretched into months, and Helen's integration into their family became more complete, while my exclusion became more obvious. The breaking point came 3 weeks before Father's Day, at what was supposed to be a casual family barbecue. I'd been invited, which felt like progress, until I arrived to find Helen holding court on the back deck while Marcus grilled steaks and Jessica fussed over the side dishes. The conversation revolved entirely around Helen's stories, Helen's opinions, and Helen's plans for redecorating their guest room to better suit her frequent overnight stays. I sat in a lawn chair, nursing a beer and trying to contribute to conversations that seemed to flow around me like water around a stone. When I mentioned a project I was working on in my woodshop, the polite smiles and quick topic changes made it clear that my interests weren't particularly interesting to anyone present. But when Helen mentioned wanting to take up sailing, the entire dynamic shifted. Marcus lit up like a Christmas tree, launching into stories about a sailing trip he'd taken in college, asking detailed questions about what kind of boat she might prefer, discussing marinas and sailing lessons with the enthusiasm he used to reserve for conversations with me about baseball or fishing or the model airplanes we'd built together when he was young. That's when I knew. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't just about helping a grieving widow adjust to life in a new city. This was about replacement. Helen wasn't just joining the family. She was taking my place in it. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I excused myself to use the bathroom and stood in Marcus's guest bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror and seeing a man who'd become invisible in his own son's life. The walls were covered with family photos, and I found myself searching for my own face among the smiling images. There I was, in the background of Marcus's law school graduation photo. There, barely visible behind Jessica's shoulder at their wedding reception. Always present, but never central. Always supporting, but never celebrated. I returned to the deck to find Helen showing everyone photos on her phone of yachts she'd been admiring online. Not boats, yachts. 40-foot, 50-foot floating palaces that cost more than most people's houses. Marcus was leaning over her shoulder, pointing at features and asking questions about engines and cabin configurations, with the kind of focused attention I hadn't received from him in years. When the evening ended and I prepared to leave, Marcus walked me to my car with the kind of distracted politeness you might show an acquaintance who'd overstayed their welcome. I wanted to say something about feeling excluded, about missing the relationship we used to have, about watching him build a new family that didn't seem to include the man who'd sacrificed everything to raise him. Instead, I just hugged him goodbye and told him I loved him. He patted my back absently and said he'd call me soon, the same promise he'd been making for months without following through. As I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, I found myself wondering if this was what the rest of my life would look like. Birthday cards from a son who'd forgotten what day it was, holiday invitations that felt more like charity than genuine inclusion, a front row seat to watch someone else receive the love and attention I'd spent 27 years earning. But I had no idea how much worse it was about to get, because 3 weeks later, on Father's Day morning, I would discover exactly what my decades of sacrifice were worth to the son I'd raised alone. And that discovery would change everything between us forever. The gift card sat on my kitchen table next to my coffee mug, the cardboard edges already starting to curl in the morning humidity. $2.50. I picked up my phone and scrolled through Marcus's social media posts from the marina, watching my son present Helen with a yacht that cost more than I'd made in the past 5 years combined. In that moment, something inside me shifted. Something that had been bending for months finally snapped. I'd spent my entire adult life being grateful for whatever attention Marcus chose to give me, accepting whatever scraps of affection he threw my way, convincing myself that this was what good fathers did. They sacrificed without complaint, loved without expectation, and faded gracefully into the background when their children's lives moved beyond them. But looking at that gift card, looking at those photos of Helen's yacht christening, I realized I'd been playing by the wrong rules. I'd been so focused on being the father Marcus needed that I'd forgotten to be the man I deserved to be. And that man wouldn't accept being valued at $2.50 while watching his replacement receive a yacht. The thing about being systematically replaced in your own son's life is that it happens so gradually, you almost don't notice it until you're completely erased. One day, you're the most important man in his world, and the next day, you're getting a gas station gift card while another woman gets a floating mansion. But here's what Marcus didn't understand about his old man. Here's what 27 years of raising him alone had taught me about consequences and respect. I wasn't just some broken-down retiree he could pat on the head and dismiss. I was Robert Chen, the man who'd built a life from nothing, who'd turned a high school dropout into a successful business owner, who'd accumulated enough wealth and influence over 6 decades to make his pampered lawyer son's head spin. But I'd kept that power hidden, wrapped up in humble work clothes and quiet generosity, because I thought being a good father meant making yourself smaller so your child could shine brighter. That morning, staring at that insulting gift card, I realized I'd been doing fatherhood all wrong. Good fathers don't enable disrespect. They don't accept crumbs while watching strangers feast at tables they built. Good fathers teach their children that love is earned through mutual respect, not extracted through guilt and obligation. So I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I walked to my home office, the one Marcus hadn't seen in 2 years despite living 20 minutes away, and opened the safe behind my desk. Inside were documents that told a very different story about his father than the one he'd convinced himself was true. Property deeds for 17 rental units across 3 states, investment portfolios worth more than his annual salary, the incorporation papers for Chen Holdings, the umbrella company I'd built quietly over the past 15 years while he was busy becoming a hotshot attorney. See, while Marcus was learning to bill clients $300 an hour for legal advice, his old man was buying distressed properties, renovating them with his own hands, and building a real estate empire that generated more passive income in a month than most people saw in a year. While he was impressing judges with his courtroom presence, I was impressing bank presidents with my portfolio performance and credit rating. The steel mill job he remembered from his childhood? That had ended 12 years ago when I took early retirement to focus on my investments full-time. But I'd never told him about the transition because I didn't want him to think his success was any less meaningful, didn't want him to feel like his achievements were overshadowed by his father's wealth. I'd kept working with my hands, kept wearing the same simple clothes, kept driving the same modest truck, because I thought that's what good fathers did. They stayed in the background, let their children believe they were self-made, avoided any appearance of showing off or competing with the next generation. But looking at Helen's yacht photos on my phone, I realized my humility had been interpreted as weakness. My generosity had been mistaken for desperation. My love had been taken for granted because Marcus had no idea what he was taking for granted. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. James Morrison, Marcus's boss at the law firm, had been a client of mine for 8 years. Not a legal client, a real estate client. I'd helped him buy and flip 6 properties, netting him close to $2 million in profits over our partnership. We'd developed a friendship built on mutual respect and successful business dealings. James had no idea his star associate was my son. Why would he? Different last names, different social circles. Marcus had always been Marcus Chen Williams, taking his mother's hyphenated surname when he started his legal career, because he thought it sounded more prestigious than plain old Chen. I'd never corrected the assumption that we weren't related. The phone rang twice before James picked up. "Robert, good to hear from you. How's the market looking?" "Actually, James, I'm calling about something else today. I need to discuss one of your employees with you, Marcus Chen Williams." There was a pause. "Marcus? What about him? He's one of our best associates." "I know he is. He's also my son." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then James cleared his throat. "Your son? But he never mentioned, we've talked about family and he's never said his father was in real estate." That's because he doesn't know the extent of my business interests. And frankly, after this morning, I'm not sure he deserves to know. I explained the situation carefully, professionally. The years of sacrifice, the gradual exclusion from family gatherings, the replacement with Helen, and finally, the gift card that had broken the camel's back. James listened without interruption, and I could hear him taking notes. Robert, I had no idea. Marcus talks about you sometimes, but he always made it sound like, well, like you were just a simple working man who'd done his best but didn't really understand his world. The words stung, but they didn't surprise me. That's exactly how Marcus saw me. A well-meaning but simple father who'd peaked at factory work and couldn't relate to his son's sophisticated professional life. James, I need you to understand something. The Chen Holdings account represents 15% of your firm's real estate business. The referrals I've sent your way over the past 8 years have generated close to $3 million in legal fees for your practice. I've been a very good client, and more than that, I've been a loyal friend. Absolutely, Robert. You've been incredible to work with. Then I think you'll understand why I'm disappointed to learn that my son has been representing me as some kind of charity case. A simple father who doesn't understand the complexities of his successful son's life. Another pause. What are you asking me to do? I'm not asking you to fire him. I'm asking you to help him understand who his father really is. Tomorrow morning, I want you to assign him to handle the Chen Holdings account personally. I want him to review all our transactions over the past 8 years. I want him to see exactly how much business his simple working-class father has brought to the firm that pays his salary. And then I want to see if the man I raised has enough character to acknowledge what he's learned and act accordingly, or if he's become so blinded by his new family's influence that he can't recognize his own father's worth. James agreed immediately, not just because of the business relationship, but because he understood what it meant for a father to feel invisible in his own son's life. He had teenage children of his own and couldn't imagine them treating him with such casual disrespect. But that was just the first call I made that morning. The second was to Helen's yacht dealer. Marina Bay Luxury Boats had sold Helen her floating palace, and their sales records were public information for anyone who knew where to look. More importantly, their financing was handled through Coastal Marine Credit, a company I'd been doing business with for years in my real estate ventures. I'd helped finance 17 boat purchases for various rental properties I owned near lakes and rivers, properties where boats were amenities that justified higher rental rates. Coastal Marine Credit knew me as a reliable client with an excellent payment history and substantial collateral. Mr. Chen, always a pleasure. What can I do for you today? I need to discuss the recent yacht purchase financed for Helen Whitmore. I believe the boat was purchased by Marcus Chen Williams. I can't discuss specific client information, you understand. Of course, but I can discuss my own business relationship with your company. And I can discuss what happens when I discover that my son has made a major financial decision that affects our family without consulting the man who co-signed his original mortgage and whose credit rating enabled his current lifestyle. That got their attention. Within an hour, I had all the details. Marcus had financed the yacht through a combination of a loan against his house and a personal credit line. The monthly payments were $3,800, and the total debt was just over $400,000. $400,000 to impress a woman he'd known for 6 months, while his father got a $2 gift card. But here's what made it even more interesting. Marcus's income, while respectable for a lawyer, wasn't quite enough to comfortably afford those payments, along with his existing mortgage, car loans, and lifestyle expenses. He was stretching himself thin financially to play the generous son-in-law, probably figuring he'd somehow make it work through bonuses and overtime billing. That gave me leverage I hadn't expected. And leverage, I was learning, was something I should have been using all along instead of just accepting whatever treatment my son chose to give me. The third call was to my accountant, Patricia Wong, who'd been handling my business finances for over a decade. Patricia, I need you to prepare a comprehensive financial statement showing all Chen Holdings assets, income streams, and net worth. I need it detailed enough for a lawyer to understand, and I need it by tomorrow afternoon. Certainly, Mr. Chen. May I ask what this is for? It's time my son learned who his father really is, and it's time I stopped pretending to be less than I am for the sake of his ego. By noon that Father's Day, I'd set 3 wheels in motion that would completely reshape Marcus's understanding of his family dynamics. By the end of the week, he would know exactly what his father was worth, exactly how much his disrespect had cost him, and exactly what happened when you mistake kindness for weakness. But I wasn't done yet. Because the most important lesson I was about to teach my son wasn't about money or business success. It was about the difference between earning respect and demanding it, between being grateful for love and taking it for granted. Helen's yacht was beautiful, I'll give her that. But it was about to become the most expensive mistake Marcus had ever made, and that $2 gift card. It was about to teach him a lesson worth more than all the floating palaces in the world. The fourth call was to my insurance agent, Michael Torres. We'd been doing business for 20 years, ever since I'd started building my property portfolio. He handled everything from my rental unit coverage to my personal umbrella policy, and more importantly, he understood the intricate web of liability that comes with substantial assets. Michael, I need you to review all policies where Marcus Chen Williams appears as a beneficiary or co-insured party. That would be your life insurance, the umbrella policy, and I believe he's listed as an emergency contact on several of your property insurance policies. Why? Is something wrong? Something's very wrong, but it's about to be corrected. I need those beneficiary designations updated by Wednesday, and I need a comprehensive review of any financial exposure he might have through our connected policies. What Marcus didn't realize was that his comfortable lifestyle wasn't just supported by his lawyer salary. For the past 8 years, I'd been quietly covering gaps in his financial life. When his property taxes jumped unexpectedly, I'd had my accountant handle the overage without mentioning it. When his homeowner's insurance premiums spiked after a neighborhood claim, I'd absorbed the difference. When he'd needed a co-signer for his mortgage refinance 2 years ago, I'd provided not just my signature, but a financial guarantee that made his loan possible. All of this assistance had flowed through shell companies and third-party arrangements, invisible to Marcus, but absolutely critical to maintaining the lifestyle that let him buy yachts for women who weren't his father. He thought he was self-made, but he was actually standing on a foundation I'd built and maintained without his knowledge. The fifth call went to Dr. Sarah Kim, Marcus's neighbor and one of Jessica's closest friends. Sarah had bought her house through one of my property management companies 3 years ago, though she had no idea her landlord was her neighbor's father. The rental agreement went through Chen Holdings, and all interactions were handled by my property manager. Dr. Kim, this is Robert Chen from Chen Holdings. I need to discuss the property at 42 Maple Street. Oh, hello, Mr. Chen. Is there an issue with the house? Not with the house itself, but with the neighborhood dynamics. I've recently learned that my tenants are involved in some concerning financial behavior that could affect property values in the area. I explained carefully that I'd discovered Marcus and Jessica were overextending themselves financially, taking on debt they couldn't realistically service, and that this kind of financial instability could impact the desirability of the neighborhood. I wasn't lying, exactly. Marcus was overextended, and it could affect property values if he ended up in foreclosure. I'm going to be making some changes to my investment strategy in that area, I continued. The rent on your property will be increasing to market rate starting next month. I believe current market rate for a house like yours is about $1,800 more than you're currently paying. Sarah's sharp intake of breath told me she understood the implications. The below-market rent she'd been paying was about to disappear, along with the comfortable buffer that had let her and her husband live beyond their means in an expensive neighborhood. Mr. Chen, that's a substantial increase. We weren't expecting anything like that. I understand, and I apologize for the short notice, but my financial advisors have made it clear that I've been undercharging for my properties, and it's time to bring everything up to market standards. What I didn't tell her was that Marcus and Jessica's social circle was built on financial illusions just like theirs. Half their neighbors were living in houses they couldn't actually afford, propped up by family money, rental arrangements, or creative financing that kept them looking successful while swimming in debt. The sixth call was to my attorney, David Park, who'd been handling my legal affairs since I'd started Chen Holdings. David was everything Marcus thought he was himself, brilliant, connected, and successful, but with the wisdom that comes from building something real rather than just billing hours for other people's problems. David, I need you to prepare documentation for a trust restructure. Everything currently designated for Marcus Chen Williams needs to be redirected into an educational trust that he can only access under specific conditions. What kind of conditions? The kind that require him to demonstrate respect, gratitude, and genuine family commitment before he can benefit from wealth he didn't earn. David had handled enough family wealth disputes to understand exactly what I meant. Children who took their parents' generosity for granted often needed structured consequences to remember their place in the family hierarchy. How much are we talking about, Robert? Everything. The life insurance, the inheritance designations, his share of the business holdings. All of it goes into a trust that pays out only if he meets specific behavioral benchmarks related to family relationships. That's substantial. Are you sure about this? I looked at the gift card still sitting on my kitchen table, then at my phone screen showing Helen's yacht celebration. Marcus laughing and embracing his mother-in-law while she showed off the floating palace he'd bought her with money he'd borrowed against his future. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. By Monday morning, the dominoes I'd set in motion over the weekend were already beginning to fall. James Morrison called Marcus into his office at 9 sharp and handed him the Chen Holdings file, watching my son's face change as he realized the scope of his father's business empire. The property portfolios, the investment returns, the legal fees generated over 8 years of business, all of it flowing through companies owned by the man Marcus had been treating like a charity case. James later told me that Marcus had gone completely white, then red, then asked to be excused to make a phone call. That phone call came to me at 9:47. "Dad, I need to see you right now." His voice carried a tone I hadn't heard in years. Not the distracted politeness or casual dismissal, but something approaching panic mixed with what might have been respect. "I'm busy today, Marcus. Maybe we can schedule something for next week." "Dad, please. I just learned about Chen Holdings, about your business, about everything you've been doing while I thought you were just..." "Just what, son? Just a simple factory worker who didn't understand your sophisticated world?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Can I please come over? Can we talk?" "You can come over," I said carefully. "But talking's going to require you to do something you haven't done in a very long time." "What's that?" "Listen." He arrived 30 minutes later, looking like he'd aged 5 years since Father's Day morning. The confident stride was gone, replaced by the uncertain shuffle of a man whose entire worldview had just been demolished. He sat across from me in my living room, the same room he'd dismissed as too simple for his refined tastes, and waited for me to speak. I let the silence stretch. After 27 years of jumping to fill every awkward moment in our conversations, of working to make him comfortable and engaged, I was done carrying the emotional labor of our relationship. "The Chen Holdings file makes for interesting reading, doesn't it?" He nodded miserably. "Dad, I had no idea. Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Tell you what exactly? That I was successful? That I'd built something significant? That the man you've been patronizing for the past 2 years actually employs more people than your law firm?" "I never meant to patronize you. Marcus, you introduced me to your colleagues as your father who works with his hands, like it was something to be embarrassed about. You excluded me from family gatherings because Helen's refined tastes might be offended by my simple ways. You gave me a $2 gift card while buying a $400,000 yacht for a woman you've known for 6 months. He winced at each point but didn't try to defend himself. That was something, at least. "The yacht," he said quietly. "How did you know about the financing?" "Son, I know about everything. Your mortgage, your credit lines, your monthly expenses, even the insurance policies that I've been subsidizing without you realizing it. I know exactly how overextended you are financially, and I know exactly how much trouble you're in." His face went pale. "What do you mean, trouble?" I pulled out Patricia's financial analysis and spread it across the coffee table between us. Bank statements, loan documents, payment schedules, all of it laid out in neat columns that told the story of a man living far beyond his means. "Your yacht payments are $3,800 a month. Your mortgage is $2,900. Car payments, credit cards, insurance, utilities, property taxes, you're spending about $11,000 a month to maintain your lifestyle. Your take-home pay, after taxes and 401k contributions, is about $9,500. He stared at the numbers like they were written in a foreign language. "That means you're running a deficit of $1,500 every month, and it's been getting worse since Helen moved to town and you started trying to impress her family. The only reason you haven't crashed yet is because of the financial cushions I've been providing without you knowing about them. What kind of cushions? The kind that are about to disappear. Your insurance premiums are going back to market rate next month. The property tax assistance I've been providing through shell companies is ending. The cosigner guarantees that have been keeping your credit lines open are being withdrawn. Marcus looked like he might be sick. Dad, you can't do that. I'll lose everything. No, son, you'll lose the things you can't actually afford. There's a difference. He ran his hands through his hair, the same gesture he'd used as a child when he was overwhelmed by homework or social problems. But this wasn't a scraped knee or a failed test that Daddy could fix with a hug and some encouraging words. What do you want from me? I want you to understand what you threw away for the sake of impressing people who don't actually care about you. I want you to realize that the man you've been treating like an embarrassment built everything you thought you'd achieved on your own. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the modest neighborhood I'd chosen to live in, despite being able to afford much more. But mostly, Marcus, I want you to learn the difference between being given respect and earning it. I do respect you, Dad. I turned back to face him. Son, you bought Helen a yacht and gave me a coffee shop gift card. If that's your version of respect, then we have very different definitions of the word. The truth hung between us like a wall built from years of accumulated slights and casual dismissals. Marcus had choices to make now, and for the first time in our relationship, those choices would have real consequences that I wouldn't rush to cushion or fix. But this conversation was just the beginning, because Helen's yacht was about to become the center of a much larger lesson about family, loyalty, and what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. And that lesson was going to cost my son far more than $400,000 before it was finished. The conversation in my living room that Monday morning was just the appetizer. The main course of Marcus's education was still coming, served cold with a side of consequences he'd never seen before. I watched him absorb the financial reality I'd laid out, seeing his face cycle through disbelief, panic, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. But understanding and change are two different things entirely. Dad, maybe we can work something out, he said, leaning forward with the desperate energy of a man watching his world crumble. I could take on more cases, bill more hours, maybe refinance some things. With what collateral, son? You're already leveraged to the hilt. He pulled out his phone, probably calculating monthly budgets and payment schedules in his head. The yacht, I could sell the yacht. Take a loss, but maybe break even enough to stabilize things. I almost smiled, almost. Marcus, do you know what happens when someone defaults on a marine loan? His silence told me he didn't. The lender repossesses the vessel, sells it at auction, and comes after the borrower for the difference. Boats depreciate faster than cars, especially luxury yachts. You'd still owe about $200,000 after they sold Helen's floating palace. The color drained from his face completely. $200,000. Plus legal fees, storage costs, and penalties. Your brilliant gesture of love is about to become a financial anchor that drags you straight to the bottom. Marcus set his phone down with shaking hands. For the first time in years, I was seeing him without the armor of professional confidence and social superiority. He looked exactly like the scared 12-year-old who'd come to me when his bike was stolen, certain that Daddy would fix everything and make it right. But Daddy wasn't going to fix this one. There has to be something, he whispered. Some way to work this out. There is, I said quietly, but it requires you to do something you haven't done since you were a teenager. What? Ask for help from the man you've been treating like hired help. The words hit him like a physical blow. He actually flinched, looking down at his expensive shoes, the ones that probably cost more than I spent on clothing in 6 months. I know I've been terrible to you, he said finally. I know I've taken you for granted, excluded you, treated you like you didn't matter. But Dad, I'm drowning here. If I lose the house, if I default on these loans, my career is over. Jessica will leave me. I'll have nothing. You'll have what I had when I started over after your mother died. Nothing except the willingness to work for something better. But you had skills, experience with your hands. I'm just a lawyer. I don't know how to build things, fix things, create value from nothing. I studied his face, seeing genuine fear mixed with the first glimmer of humility I'd witnessed in years. This was the moment I'd been building toward since opening that insulting gift card. The moment when my son would either learn who his father really was or prove that Helen's influence had poisoned him beyond redemption. Marcus, do you remember when you were 8 and wanted that expensive baseball glove for Little League? He looked confused by the change in subject. The Wilson A2000? Yeah, you said we couldn't afford it. But you got it anyway, didn't you? You worked overtime for 3 weeks straight, double shifts on weekends. I remember because Mom was upset that you were never home. And do you remember what I told you when I gave you that glove? His voice was barely audible. That nothing was too good for my son, but everything had to be earned. I worked 90 hours those 3 weeks, Marcus. 90 hours of overtime at time and a half pay to buy you a glove you used for 2 seasons before deciding baseball wasn't your passion anymore. He winced, I remember. But I didn't complain, did I? I didn't make you feel guilty about the sacrifice. I was happy to do it because that's what fathers do for their children. We work, we sacrifice, we give everything we have to help them reach their dreams. Marcus nodded, tears starting to form in the corners of his eyes. But here's what you never learned, son. That generosity was supposed to teach you gratitude, not entitlement. It was supposed to show you the value of sacrifice, not convince you that other people's efforts were your birthright. I know that now, Dad. I see it now. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you learned exactly the wrong lesson. You learned that fathers exist to solve their children's problems without question or recognition. You learned that love means never having to say thank you, because it's just expected. I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd been preparing since our conversation began. Inside were documents that would either save Marcus's financial life or teach him the hardest lesson he'd ever learned. I'm going to make you an offer, Marcus. One time only, non-negotiable terms. His face lit up with desperate hope. Anything, Dad. I'll do anything. Don't agree until you hear what it costs. I spread the papers across the coffee table, loan documents, partnership agreements, employment contracts, all prepared by David Park over the weekend. I will assume your yacht debt completely. $400,000 paid in full today. I will cover your mortgage payments for the next 6 months while you restructure your finances. I will provide a $50,000 emergency fund to handle any immediate cash flow issues. Marcus's breath came out in a rush of relief. Dad, I can't tell you how much this means. I'm not finished. In exchange, you will sell your house and move into one of my rental properties at market rate. You will surrender your credit cards and live on a cash budget that I approve. You will attend weekly financial counseling sessions with my accountant, and most importantly, you will work for me. The relief on his face flickered. Work for you? Ya Chen Holdings needs an in-house attorney to handle property acquisitions, tenant disputes, and regulatory compliance. The position pays $60,000 a year plus benefits, about half what you're making at Morrison's firm. Marcus stared at the contracts like they might bite him. Dad, I can't take a $60,000 job. Do you know what that would do to my reputation? What Jessica would say? What Helen would think? And there it was, the moment of truth. When faced with a choice between his pride and his financial survival, between his father's help and his new family's approval, Marcus was still choosing the opinions of people who'd contributed nothing to his success. Son, let me make sure I understand this correctly. You're asking me to bail you out of a $400,000 mistake, but you're not willing to work for the man who's saving your life because it might embarrass you? It's not about embarrassment, it's about career trajectory. If I take a $60,000 job, even temporarily, it looks like I'm moving backward. Other firms won't want to hire me. I'll be damaged goods. I gathered up the contracts and returned them to the folder. Then I guess we have nothing more to discuss. Dad, wait. Maybe we can modify the terms. Maybe I could work part-time for you while keeping my position at Morrison's, or maybe you could structure it as a consulting agreement instead of employment. Marcus, you still don't understand. This isn't a negotiation. This is me offering to save you from the consequences of your own arrogance, with conditions designed to teach you humility and respect. If you're not willing to accept those conditions, then you're not ready to be helped. I stood up and walked toward the door. I think it's time for you to leave now. Dad, please, be reasonable. I'm trying to find a middle ground here. There is no middle ground, son. For 27 years, I've been meeting you in the middle while you kept moving the boundaries. I've been reasonable while you've been selfish. I've been grateful for scraps while you've been dining on banquets I provided. I opened the front door and held it for him. You have a choice to make, Marcus. You can swallow your pride, accept my terms, and learn what it means to earn your father's help. Or you can maintain your dignity while you lose everything you think makes you better than me." He walked to the door slowly, stopping at the threshold like he might change his mind. "What happens if I refuse?" "Then you handle your financial crisis the way any other overextended adult handles it. You deal with the consequences of your choices without Daddy rushing in to fix everything." "And Helen's yacht?" "Becomes Helen's problem when the bank comes to repossess it. I'm sure she'll understand that her generous son-in-law bit off more than he could chew trying to impress her." Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: embarrassment, anger, fear, and something that might have been the beginning of genuine remorse. But he still couldn't quite bring himself to accept that his father held all the cards in this game. "I need time to think about this," he said finally. "You have until Friday. After that, the offer expires and you're on your own." He nodded and walked to his car, moving like a man carrying the weight of impossible choices. As I watched him drive away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years when it came to my relationship with Marcus: control. For the first time since he'd become an adult, I wasn't the one hoping he'd call, waiting for invitations to family gatherings, grateful for whatever attention he chose to spare for his old man. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and Marcus was about to learn what it felt like to need something from the man he'd been taking for granted. But the real lesson was still coming, because Wednesday morning brought news that would change everything about how my son viewed his carefully constructed world, and that news would make his yacht payments look like pocket change compared to what he was about to lose. The call came at 7:30 a.m. while I was having my coffee and reading the financial section. Sarah Kim's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "Mr. Chen, I need to discuss the rent increase you mentioned. My husband and I have been talking, and there's no way we can afford an additional $1,800 a month. I understand, Dr. Kim. Market conditions have changed significantly, and I need to bring all my properties in line with current valuations. But we've been excellent tenants. We've never been late on rent. We've maintained the property beautifully. We've even paid for improvements out of our own pocket. And I've appreciated that, but being a good tenant doesn't insulate you from market realities." I could hear her husband talking urgently in the background, something about calling their real estate agent and looking at other options. "Be das mate." "Mr. Chen, if we can't work something out, we'll have to move. And frankly, there's nothing else in this neighborhood we can afford. That's unfortunate, but understandable. I'll need 60 days' notice if you're planning to vacate." After I hung up, I poured myself another cup of coffee and waited. The call I was expecting came 47 minutes later. "Dad, what the hell did you do to Sarah and Tom?" Marcus's voice was sharp with accusation, the tone he probably used with opposing counsel in depositions. "Good morning, son. I had a business conversation with one of my tenants about bringing their rent up to market rate." "Market rate? Dad, you're doubling their rent. They can't afford that." "Then they should consider moving to a neighborhood that better fits their budget." "These are Jessica's friends, Dad, our neighbors. You can't just destroy their lives to make a point." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "Marcus, let me ask you something. When you bought Helen a yacht worth more than most people's houses, were you concerned about making a point? That's completely different." "Is it? You spent $400,000 to impress one woman while giving your father a $2 gift card. Now I'm charging market rent for a property that's been subsidizing your friend's lifestyle for 3 years. How exactly is that different? Because Sarah and Tom didn't do anything wrong. They're innocent bystanders in whatever game you're playing." "And what game am I playing, son?" The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally, his voice came back, quieter but still angry. "You're trying to manipulate me by hurting people I care about." "No, Marcus, I'm running my business according to sound financial principles instead of emotional charity. The same principles you should have used before buying a yacht you couldn't afford." "Dad, please, leave Sarah and Tom out of this. They don't deserve to lose their home because I made mistakes." "Their home? Marcus, they're renters. I'm the one who owns their home, and I've been letting them live in it for substantially below market value as a favor to neighbors I didn't even know were connected to my son." "As a favor to neighbors or as a favor to me?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Marcus was finally starting to understand the web of financial support that had been propping up his entire social circle without his knowledge. "Tell me something, son. How many of your friends and neighbors do you think are living in my properties?" Another long silence. "How many?" "Guess." "I don't know. Sarah and Tom, obviously. Maybe 1 or 2 others?" 7 families, Marcus. 7 families in your neighborhood are my tenants, all paying below market rent because they're connected to you somehow. Jessica's yoga instructor, the couple who host your book club, your next-door neighbors who watch your house when you travel, even Helen's bridge partner from the country club. I could hear him breathing hard, probably doing the math in his head. I've been subsidizing your entire social network for years without realizing it. All those people who think you're so successful, so well-connected, so financially stable, they've all been living on my generosity while you took credit for introducing them to such reasonable landlords. Dad, I didn't know. Oh, of course you didn't know, because you never bothered to ask how your father could afford to be so generous with his rental rates while living such a modest lifestyle himself. What are you going to do? I'm going to treat them all exactly the way you've been treating me, Marcus, like business relationships instead of family obligations. You can't do that. These people have families, mortgages, they've built their lives around the rent they're paying now. The same way I built my life around having a son who respected and appreciated his father's sacrifices. The line went quiet except for the sound of Marcus's ragged breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. How long have you known? About the properties, about my friends, about all of it? I've known about the properties since I bought them. I realized the connection to your social circle about 6 months ago when I started paying attention to who was living where. But I didn't understand the full scope until I started investigating after your Christmas dinner invitation. What Christmas dinner invitation? The one I didn't receive, Marcus. The one where Helen was the guest of honor while your father spent the holiday alone. The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. Finally, his voice came back thick with something that might have been tears. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize, I never meant for things to get this bad between us. But they did get this bad, son. And sorry doesn't fix years of taking someone for granted. What do you want from me? Tell me what I can do to make this right. I already told you what I want. The same offer is still on the table until Friday. The job with your company? Dad, be reasonable. There has to be another way. There is another way, Marcus. You can let your friends find new places to live at market rates. Let Helen deal with losing her yacht when you default on the loan, and let Jessica see what her husband looks like when he's not propped up by his father's money. She'll leave me. Maybe, or maybe she'll discover that she married a man instead of a bank account. And if she does leave? I looked around my living room, at the modest furniture and simple decorations that had been good enough for me, but not impressive enough for my son's new family. Tarihi. Then you'll learn what I learned when your mother died, Marcus. That the people who love you for who you are will stay, and the people who love you for what you can provide will find someone else to use. That's harsh, Dad. Truth usually is, but here's what I've learned over the past week, son. Being harsh occasionally is better than being taken for granted permanently. I hung up without saying goodbye, leaving Marcus to contemplate the ruins of the life he'd built on foundations he'd never bothered to examine. By Friday, he would either swallow his pride and accept that his father was offering him salvation, or he would discover what drowning felt like when there was no one left to throw him a rope. But Thursday brought a development I hadn't anticipated. A knock on my door at 6 in the evening, and Jessica standing on my porch with tears in her eyes and desperation written across her face. Robert, we need to talk.